What is my background? Well, I began as a language teacher, teaching French, Spanish, and English. I spoke 5 languages. Now I speak 6, including Nepali. My doctorate was in education, and I did a lot of work training teachers, training administrators, and then worked in the inner cities with at-risk children, worked with foundations, writing proposals and evaluating proposals. So really it's an educational background. What brought me to Nepal the first time and what brought me back again and again? Well, I was happily scuba diving, and one of my friends said, I'm going to Nepal. Are you coming? This was in 1983, and 3 of us trotted off to Nepal. We had an amazing trip. At that time, I only spoke 5 languages, and I discovered very quickly that I couldn't read the street signs, I couldn't talk to anybody, and I didn't understand a lot of the culture. Ended out almost getting shot because I sat on a rock who turned out to be a god. So I came home and I said, this won't work. I found a Nepali freshman at Bryn Mawr who just shrunk all her clothes in the laundry. And I said, you teach me Nepali, I'll teach you the washing machine. And she did, and I did. She became my adopted Nepali daughter, and her parents adopted me. And her parents, she happened to be Dina Bangda. And her father, you all know, was Lane Singh Bangda, and his wife, Manu. So they were my teachers. And I went back, and they showed me Nepal. Well, after I'd gone back a couple times, people said, can I go with you? And then they looked and they said, okay, where are we going next? Well, this was the time of the Gulf War, and at that time it was very difficult to get to Asia. So we found ourselves beginning a company with 1 foot in Asia and 1 foot in South America. In those days, people were seeing 10 cities in 8 days. They were doing activities. We're going to go hiking, we're going to go rafting, but nobody was doing concepts. And I am a teacher. My question was, what is this country about? How do I design a program to say it? What are the religions and pilgrimage sites? What are the cultures and crafts? What are the different ethnic groups? What's the environment? How do people interact with it? So we built a company around those concepts. And that was unique at that time. In a way, it was everything I'd done in my life. If you take people on a trip, you teach a class. If you design program, you design curriculum. If you run a company and train leaders, you're doing administration. And then if you start a nonprofit, you're doing all the nonprofit work. So it's everything I always did in my life. It was a classroom without walls. How did I get involved with building libraries? Well, because of the kind of trips we were doing, people went out of the way to bring us into their lives. And we wanted to give something back. In the very early days, we gave scholarships. The first Nepali woman to graduate from an American medical school is somebody we funded. We helped put benches and desks and roofs in schools, but ultimately they were Band-Aids on a bleeding artery. In those days, the literacy rate in Nepal was 30%. Most of it was in the cities, and most of it was male. Countryside had nothing. Schools had no benches and desks. They had no roofs. Heaven knows they had no books. So it was a question, what are you going to do? At the end of a trip to base camp, people started to tip me. And I turned to the Sardar and I said, Domi, if you could do anything in your village, what would you do? And he said, I'd like a library. And light bulbs went off in my head. If you build a school, it's for children. If you build a hospital, it's for sick people. If you build a scholarship, it's 1 child. If you build a library, it's for the whole town. So that's where it started. Well, actually, it was a very funny story. I told Domi, you have to write a proposal, you have to have a committee, you have to have a budget and a timeline, and you have to figure out how we're going to support it, because I have children I don't want anymore. A year and a half went by, never heard anything. And I was on a plane flying to Nepal. My seat was bumped and I found myself furious in the middle of a 6-person row. And I didn't talk to anybody. Finally, I had to get up. I came back, and sitting next to me were 2 Nepalis. And they started talking to me. One of them turned out to be the headmaster in Domi's village, Junbesi. The other was the headmaster in Edmund Hillary's village, Kunjo. And the headmaster in Domi's village, Master Kaji, looked at me and he said, "Oh, you are the lady who..." And I said, "Oh, you are Master Kaji," because I'd never met him. 6 weeks later, I had a proposal. And the next thing I knew, we trekked 900 books, because that's all there was at that time in Nepali, over a 10,000 and 12,000 foot pass, down into a village that had never seen 900 books in its life. And Master Kaji looked at me and he said, "You know, you Westerners come, you build us clinics, you build us schools, and then you expect us to support them. But we're farmers. We can't support ourselves." Lights went off again. And I realized that if you're going to take something like this, just like in our country, you want it to be an asset, not a liability. So we decided that every library, every center we built had to have a business that would fully sustain and support it. For the first, 7 years, we really struggled funding for money. Everybody said, "Who believes in libraries? Who cares about libraries?" When I went to Nepal, they said, "Oh, have you been with USAID? Have you been with the World Bank? Have you been with the Peace Corps? Nice little girl. Come back when you have." So finally I said, "I'll do it myself." So that's where we started. Of course, you never do it yourself. It wouldn't have happened without other people. Lane helped us build a board of some of the most wonderful people in Nepal, at that point very apolitical. I had a friend and we trekked to all the villages. We put together about 10 libraries before we finally hired an executive director. And between the time he started and 2006, we built 35 libraries from one end of Nepal to the other. 2006, we won the Bill and Melinda Gates $1 million Access to Learning Award. And that was a door. First of all, it gave us respectability. Second of all, it allowed us to expand into other countries, into Bhutan and into India, where READ really began to flourish in many different patterns throughout these 3 countries. Now we've even added a 4th, the Ivory Coast in Africa, so it's a new continent. So that's really how the libraries began. That's really a bit of my background, and who knows where we'll go from here. I leave that up to you.